You have a few more governors coming? First panel ever.
If I could everybody take their seats, please. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. We've got some more governors coming. My name is Mead. I'm the governor of Wyoming, and I'm pleased to have with me Governor Bullock. This is a session many of us from ag-producing states have long looked forward to because it's our understanding this is the first time ag has been a plenary session in the National Governors Association. So I want to thank Scott and his team at National Governors for getting this put together. We have some great guests today. Let me just start off again thanking Governor Bullock. I'm chairman of the Natural Resources Committee. Governor Brown of California is the vice chairman, and he wasn't able to make it, and so we're pleased to have Governor Bullock from the Big Sky State with us today. So I'm pleased the title of this is The Future of Food and Ag, and the session will highlight the importance of ag industry to our individual states and the nation's economy to include innovative examples of sustainable ag practices. These meetings give us a great opportunity to hear what other governors and states are doing, share best practices, and influence the national dialogue. Me personally, I'm a fourth-generation rancher, and when I'm through this year being governor, looking forward to going back to that pace of being a rancher. As I think about ag in Wyoming, I'm very proud of Wyoming ag. It is our third largest industry, and we see many long-term family operations provide not only food for the country's tables, but also open spaces, wildlife habitat, recreational opportunities, and great traditions. As a rancher and as governor of Wyoming, I think about where we're going in the future with ag innovation, value-added products, tech advances that can help ag, increasing trade. All these present great opportunities in the 21st century. I'm surrounded by many family farmers today, and not only up on stage here, but many governors come from an ag background and understand ag at a very deep level. And they're advocates for ag, and in addition to these ag advocates, we have an excellent panel with us that includes third-generation cow farmer from Georgia, a North Carolina hog farmer, and the president of the Alliance for Sustainable Ag. As we all know, our farmers and ranchers and those who fish are just the first, are known rightfully so as the first conservationists. They rely on and work the same lands or waters year after year, generation after generation. We celebrate those who sustain the land, and in Wyoming every year at the state fair, we honor centennial farms and ranches. These are ag businesses owned and operated by the same family for 100 years or more. These families are remarkable with so much history and experience behind them and so much more ahead of them. They are the solid core of American agriculture. You cannot have a 100-year-old farm and ranch, one that is into its second century of operation, without commitment to the land and to conservation. A centennial operation is a great sign of good stewardship. Our conversation today is particularly timely as Congress begins to consider its 2018 Farm Bill, which will provide certainty and stability for America's farmers and ranchers. So I'm pleased and will further introduce Ray Starling, Special Assistant to the President on Ag, Rod Snyder, the President of Field to Market, the Alliance for Sustainable Ag, and Zippy Duvall, the President of the American Farm Bureau Federation. I am pleased, Governor Bullock, you are here again, a friend and neighbor, and would appreciate any introductory comments from you.
Thanks so much, Governor Mead. And I'm not quite a fourth-generation rancher like Governor Mead. That's why I think he can shovel the BS a little bit better than I can at times.
No, you're from Montana. You do it very well.
I am from Montana, though, and in Montana we have about 2.5 cattle for every human being there. And that's not unique in some ways. I mean, South Dakota, I think it's about 6-1. There's 8 or 9 states across our country where we have more cattle than people. Montana has about nearly 60 million of our acres are farm and pasture land. Agriculture truly is our business. We're the #1 producer of pulse crops in the nation. That's like peas, chickpeas, lentils. In the U.S., we're #2 and #3 producers of barley and wheat. And I think whether you come from an ag producing state or anywhere across these 50 states, we certainly all appreciate good food. And our farmers and ranchers raise some of the highest quality products in the world, products that have been feeding folks across the globe for decades. By 2050, the population's expected to grow by over 2 billion people, and the demand for food is estimated to increase by 70 to 100% from where even we are today. Those statistics alone are pretty sobering, but then couple them with the fact that the average age of farmers and ranchers in the U.S. is nearly 60 years old. It's quickly apparent that we have to be doing all that we can to ensure that more young people even get involved in agriculture. Yet, like most producers would tell you, certainly in Montana or Wyoming or anywhere across this country, the game's been changing over the past few decades. Higher input costs, lower prices, a variable climate that's made it harder to turn the keys over to that next generation. I'm pleased that in Montana we have programs like Growth Through Agriculture, it's a grant program, funding projects that not only allow young folks to continue to work in ag, but also reward innovative ideas that approach old problems with new solutions and inject energy into many of our rural communities. And I think we all collectively need to be continuing to invest in those ideas, and more importantly, the people behind them. As we invest research dollars toward projects that look at increasing production, it's equally important that we invest those dollars in projects that ensure that we're responsibly managing water quality, reducing emissions, increasing soil health, and ensuring that we're good stewards of these lands that we rely on. Farmers and ranchers are some of, I think, the biggest conservationists I've ever known. They understand that their land is their legacy, and one of the most important things that we can do is ensure that that next generation has the same opportunities afforded to them as the previous generation. And finally, the importance of the relationship between the state and federal government, as Governor Mead noted at the beginning, is something that cannot be overstated. Whether it's over research or regulation or the Farm Bill or other areas, it's vitally important that that spirit of cooperation remains the cornerstone of those relationships. So, Governor Mead, thank you for including me to co-host this panel with you, and thank you all for participating.
Thank you, Governor Bullock. Good to have you here. And Governor Walker, Governor Reynolds, thank you also for being here. As we start off, it's my honor to have Ray Starling, the President's Advisor on Ag, Trade, and Food Assistance. Ray, I just got to tell you, it's really nice having somebody in that position that has the deep background in ag that you do. Ray was a National FFA officer and former 4-H member. He hails from a Century family farm in North Carolina and was Senator Tillis's chief of staff and the former general counsel to the North Carolina Department of Ag. Please join me in welcoming Ray Starling. And Ray, we look forward to your opening remarks.
Great. Thank you. Thank you to both of you governors, and we're really excited about this panel as well, and the fact that you all would have the foresight to have this conversation. We sometimes feel in the ag sector, and when we're out talking to our stakeholders, that we are sometimes the last conversation that gets to be had, and it feels like here we're one of the first. So we're grateful for that, and definitely want this to continue to be a dialogue, and this just to be the start of that. You mentioned some key words in your remarks: partnerships, economic activity, handing the keys over to the next generation. These are all topics that we worry about and talk about frequently. Today, you all have asked us to talk about trends or things that we see with regard to the future of food and agriculture. My remarks are going to be perhaps a little bit non-traditional in that regard, because when you come to D.C., you expect to talk about the Farm Bill and farm policy generally. I want to kind of share a few deep thoughts that I have from being in this town just 2 or 3 years now and working in ag policy that entire time. And at the top of that list, one of the first questions I have, and I actually mentioned this to both of you all this morning, notwithstanding the beauty of your home states and the fact that you have beautiful national parks there, we find ourselves here in this ballroom with no windows. And so we were all in agreement that the next time we did this, we would let you all host us. So let's commit to that right out front. my first point is there's kind of a general rule, and if there's not, there should be, that if we're doing anything in our economy and in our society the same way, if we're selling something or buying something the same way we were doing it a generation ago, then that methodology is ripe for disruption. And there's a place in the food system where I think that's happening now at an accelerated pace that we don't talk about much, and that is in our retail sales space. One of the trends that I'm watching is we've seen consolidation in that space. We've seen the methodology change in terms of the way food is marketed at the retail point of sale. But I think we're about to be on the precipice of a new era in that regard when we see retailers like Amazon and Walmart changing the way they're selling food, looking at selling food online, shipping food, and things of that nature. And so I just flagged that. In the United States annually, about $1 trillion spent on food, about half and half at retail establishments where people are buying food to prepare, and then the other half at places where it's already been prepared for them. I think those numbers inched up on the retail side during the recession. I've been a part of bringing them back down. Now I've been in D.C. long enough to find all the Bojangles around town. Now that I've relocated them, we're doing our part to raise the food service sales back up. But that's the trend, the idea that we're going to be in a different place with regard to how we buy food over the course of the next couple of decades. I think that is something interesting to talk about. The second point I want to make, just for sake of conversation, is we have always said in agriculture policy that ag policy is regional, meaning that at the federal level, with regard to how we negotiate farm bills and ag policy on the legislative front, that different regions of the country bring different needs to the table and different thoughts about how our policies should work. I actually thought, and I'd be interested in your gentlemen's thoughts later, not right now, I'd like to finish my own first, but I thought a few years ago that was beginning to change. I thought we were beginning to get to a model where the debates over food and ag policy were more production methodology, where you had a real sincere conversation about organic versus conventional, or different styles of production. But I see now, as we're getting back into the writing of a farm bill, it does still seem like our fights over ag policy are going to continue to be regional. And I just flagged that. I think that's worth talking about, and maybe we can do that more later. And then thirdly, one of my big personal challenges, I worry. I'm a lawyer by trade, and so I worry, I feel like, for a living. And nothing worries me more than worrying and looking around and seeing other people who I believe should also be worrying, and they're not worrying. So that makes me more worried. And so as I work in ag policy and the administration and around the Hill, a few things that I want to flag that I hope we're all worrying about and willing to talk about more. And that list is really about 4 items long, and I'm sure it's really longer than that. But the things I think about, at the top of the list, our land grant university system and its longevity. It is, of course, the main place that we do ag research in the public sector, but it's also been, for several generations now, the main place that we disseminate that research to our growers. I think that's changing as more private folks are involved in consulting directly with farmers. But I think that system faces challenges that are frankly beyond the funding questions. There's always funding issues and funding questions when it comes to the land grant system. But I think there are challenges beyond that as well that we need to be paying attention to. Number two, long-term, long-held views about how we support our farmers at the federal level. In the last Farm Bill, I think everybody would agree there was a migration of funds out of Title I, out of your direct subsidy programs, more over into crop insurance and other tools of the safety net. My concern is that if we don't continue to tell the stories of how those instruments are important, that their legacy is going to be limited in terms of their longevity. The third is threats that are frankly posed by the way we trade. I say that by saying threats posed by trading partners who are trading strategically and selfishly. And in some ways, you cannot blame them for that. But at the same time, we have placed an emphasis and are really a world leader in trading freely. And so if you have a number of players in the system who are trading selfishly and strategically, and we are trying to trade fairly, then there's going to be inequities that have to be addressed at some point. And then last but not least, just the world of data and what it brings to the farmer himself. We're really ripe for disruption with regard to the information that our farmers have about input cost and about production and about what their land is capable of doing. So that's going to be exciting to watch. With that said, my 20-second advertisement about the administration's agricultural priorities, there are really four. We can come back to these over and over. They are my touchstone in terms of how I use my time at the White House. At the top of that list is expanding ag trade. Second on that list is dealing with some of our labor challenges in agriculture. Third is, of course, regulatory reform. And fourth is making sure that agriculture in rural America are included in our conversations about infrastructure. So those are my opening thoughts. Happy to revisit those or happy to touch on other topics as time allows.
Thank you, Ray, very much for being here. Thanks for your comments. Governor Bullock, I'll turn it over to you for the next introduction.
Sounds great, and thank you, Ray. It is certainly my great pleasure to introduce Rod Snyder. Rod served as president of Field to Market, the Alliance for Sustainable Agriculture. He served in this role since 2014. The Alliance is comprised of members representing all facets of the U.S. agricultural supply chain, with members employing more than 5 million people and representing combined revenues of over $1.5 trillion. I'm not sure that even Governor Mead could sort of out-farmer this guy, given the fact that Rod lives on a family farm that was started in West Virginia in 1789, if I understand correctly. So please welcome Rod Snyder.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Governor. Appreciate the introduction. And I'll echo Ray's comments that just having this topic on the agenda in such a prominent way, I think, is so critical at this moment. Folks in the room have probably heard of the White House. You've probably heard of Farm Bureau. So let me just tell you a quick little blurb about Field to Market. We are the largest multi-stakeholder alliance in the U.S. that's working on the sustainability of commodity crop production. We have nearly 140 members from across the food and ag supply chain. It does, in fact, include Farm Bureau, actually, as well as food companies, agribusiness companies, environmental groups, universities as well. We were formed 10 years ago around this question of what does the future of U.S. agriculture look like as it pertains to sustainability, and what do consumer trends look like, and how will consumer preferences potentially drive impacts all the way back at the farm gate in terms of expectations of how we grow our food. We noticed that consumers were asking lots of questions about where and how their food was produced. They wanted to see greater transparency. And companies in particular were looking at the millennial generation demographic about their buying choices and preferences, and are responding by pivoting their brands in such a way so that they are more transparent and they are focused on sustainability. In fact, several major companies in the food chain have made very public goals around this. General Mills, for example, they're looking at a 28% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions across their supply chain by 2025. Coca-Cola has a water neutrality goal that they want to see full replenishing of the water that they're using. These companies can't reach these kinds of goals and targets unless they work back with farmers. A big part of the impacts as well as the benefits, of course, result on the farm. And so in the last few years, many companies have begun to partner with growers in a more intentional and collaborative way to help drive improvements and to support farmers in this journey. That's a little bit different than the last century, where really the main conversation around conservation and sustainability was through the Farm Bill and through Title II, the conservation title. The Farm Bill programs remain a really critical piece of how we tackle environmental challenges on private lands. It's the largest investment in private land conservation in the United States. The conservation title touches 444 million acres of land. That's larger than all the land that's managed by Fish and Wildlife, BLM, and Department of Interior. Really significant reach, and most consumers don't really recognize that. And so Supporting and maintaining that conservation network within the Farm Bill is critical, but what we're seeing now is that as the private sector takes more of an interest in these environmental outcomes, they're coming alongside the public partners and leveraging both sides of that conversation to help support farmers. We've seen companies get involved in regional conservation partnership programs, which was part of the most recent Farm Bill, which brings public and private dollars to the table to help farmers around issues of water quality and greenhouse gas emissions and wildlife habitat. Some of the companies that are involved in Field to Market have been quite active in that space. Land O'Lakes, working with the Nature Conservancy in Indiana, Ducks Unlimited, working with Kellogg's and Unilever in rice country. This is new, and it's an opportunity that I think that the whole industry needs to pay close attention to, because it is bringing that needed transparency that consumers want to see to the supply chain in a way that could be disruptive. And the last thing I'll mention, just building on a couple of comments that Ray mentioned, was that land grants do in fact continue to have play a role here. It may not look exactly like it did 20 or 30 years ago, but there is still tremendous expertise at the state level. And we've seen food companies turning to the land grants, not only for research, but also for the extension service to go out and work with farmers on the ground to help advance these environmental targets that they've been setting. Right now we've got General Mills working with Kansas State around wheat and et cetera, et cetera. And so we can't lose sight of the importance of that infrastructure. So I think that's maybe a great way to close, and look forward to the questions.
Thank you very much. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Zippy Duvall, the president of the American Farm Bureau Federation. As I mentioned, Zippy's a third-generation farmer from Georgia. And for those of you who can't see, he's got this wonderful tie on with cows on it. Zippy used to be in the dairy business. Now he's in the beef cattle business. And I want you to answer whether those are dairy cows or beef cattle as your first question, Zippy. But very pleased to have you here and appreciate your organization's great work. Zippy, please, welcome.
Well, thank you, Governor, and these are beef cattle. They're black Angus cows, and that's what I have back on my farm. And I grew up wanting to be a beef cattle farmer, and when I got of the age to go into farming business, there wasn't a whole lot of money to be made in beef cattle, and my dad was dairying, so I took the dairy over. Spent 30 years dairying, and then ended up doing beef cattle and poultry. This is my 32nd year growing poultry. We grow about 750,000 broilers a year on our farm, and we're considered small, so we're proud to be still doing that. Yeah, I've been to all the states in my first 2 years as president of the American Farm Bureau, and that was one of my goals I set out to do. And I went to every state, and a lot of the states I got to meet the governors of the state. I want to first off say thank you for the great hospitality of your people in your states. Agriculture across this country is unbelievable, and it has educated me to a level to where I'm going to be a good president for all of them, and that was my intent of doing it. But everywhere I went, I heard people talk about sustainability. And when you talk about sustainability, normally you think about environmental sustainability, but on the farm it means so much more. Really and truly, agriculture and farmers, the men and women of agriculture, really own that word, because agriculture started in the Garden of Eden, and we've sustained ourselves all these years, and we will continue to do that, but it gets more and more difficult every year. But I thought there'd be 3 areas of sustainability that I'd touch on. One is economic sustainability, generational sustainability, and environmental sustainability. When you start talking about economic sustainability, you got to think about what everybody in agriculture is going through now. We're seeing farm incomes down 50% over the last 5 years. Very difficult time out there. So we have to think of what can we do to try to relieve some of that problem. Well, the first thing is we need a farm bill. We need a farm bill that's going to go into effect this year, and we appreciate the governors helping us push our Congress into putting that farm bill together with great risk management tools that touch all our commodities. You know, farmers don't mind having buy-in into crop insurance and to other programs and participating programs in conservation and other areas, as long as they got a partner with the American people and the American government. And we don't mind doing that, and we need a good farm bill so it gives us some stability. Farmers and ranchers that row crop, they can't even borrow their operating loans without proving that they can have crop insurance on that. So it's so important that we do that. And then move on to trade. You know, you think about 95% of the people in this world live outside of our borders. We have saturated the market here in America. The only way to get our prices up and get them to a level for us to return a cost of production and make a profit is to be able to sell these products overseas. So trade is vitally important to agriculture. And I know that during the discussions of NAFTA that we're going through right now, the renegotiation of NAFTA, our words are to do no harm, because agriculture has flourished within this trade treaty that we call NAFTA. And we've called on you, our state presidents and our state farm bureaus have called on you, the governors, to step up and let your voice be heard about how important trade is to agriculture in your states. And you've made a huge difference calling the White House and working with Ray and keeping the president aware of how important the NAFTA is to our organization. And then infrastructure within the economic sustainability. Infrastructure is so important. Roads, bridges, dams, locks, they're so important. And really and truly, and I heard Secretary Perdue say this, and I totally agree with him, what sets us apart from the rest of the world is our infrastructure. We can produce it, we can deliver it on time, and we can do it consistently. And only what makes us available, makes it possible for us to do that is the wonderful infrastructure that we have across this country. And yes, it is crumbling, but we have a president that wants to rebuild it, and we're proud to hear that. But I want to touch on one thing that both of these gentlemen touched on, the infrastructure around research and development dollars in our land grants. If you look at what's going on there and what's happened there in the last 15 years, it's really sad, because our land grants is where our farmers trust the research. It doesn't have anybody that's going to make money off of it. They're giving us the honest opinion how that research hits our land, and then they deliver it to us through the Extension Service. And building that infrastructure back and getting it is so important. And if you look at what's happening across the world, we're being outspent in research and development dollars in China 3-to-1 to what America's doing. And we used to be on the cutting edge, and they're going to outgrow us if we don't go back to doing that. Generational sustainability, how are we going to bring our young people back to the farm? If you look around your states and see the farmers in your state, the average age is 58. That's younger than me. And they're all getting ready to hang their hats up and retire. And sustainability on a farm is profitability on a farm. Young farmers were coming back to the farm and grow in droves about 5 years ago when prices were good. Now, you can't even get them to consider it. And the reason they won't is they got to make a living. And there's not a living to be made in farm country today. So we got to make sure that we make it attractive for them, get it profitable, find the policies, and fix some of the things we're talking about today so that they can be profitable. But the other thing is, young people want to be connected. They want to be comfortable out in rural America. And we were so proud to have the president at our national convention in Nashville to sign executive orders to spread broadband across rural America. Our farmers are dependent on that broadband through the technologies that we have in our tractors and our iPads to be able to manage our land and do a good job for the American people and for our families, and we're dependent on doing that. And then environmental sustainability is also important too, and the conservation piece of the Farm Bill is so important. And if you look at the program called EQIP, Environmental Protection, help me, incentive programs, I just know it as EQIP because I participated in it over the years. And the problem with EQIP is there's not enough money. Farmers are lining up to participate in EQIP to protect the natural resources that are on their farms and be a partner with our federal government and the public of America to make sure that those natural resources stay healthy. And there's not enough money there, and it's been very successful. And if it wasn't successful, they wouldn't be lined up to do it. So that is important. And then lastly, in environmental is biotechnology. Biotechnology is so important to conservation. People want to give biotechnology a bad name. But let me tell you something. You look at how we farm today with the technologies that we have, including biotechnology, and compare it to what went on in the 60s. We're light years ahead when it comes to conserving our soil and our waters. Light years. And we could not have done it without biotech. Biotech lets us use less water. It lets us spray less pesticides. It helps us save the land and keep it there. We are able to use cover crops, and all our biotech seeds allows us to do that. Biotech's done more for sustainability in our environment than anything else. But I want to conclude by saying this. I want to bring it back to trade. I want to thank you all again for what you've done to help us keep NAFTA on the mind of the President and Ray over here. And we want to make sure that we do no harm to it, because we went from $8 billion worth of trade. 23 years later, it's almost $40 billion worth of trade because of NAFTA. It's been a good deal for agriculture, and we want to continue to do that. But we have to tear down the barriers around the world where we can touch the other 95% of the population in this world. And that's what will make agriculture sustainable, when we make it profitable again. I want to thank you for the opportunity here to have, my board is going to be just delighted that the governors across this country has put agriculture on the front burner and want to hear from us. So thank you so much, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Zippy. Ray, I'll start with you, going off Zippy's great comments. You know, I think about sustainability as well. And last fall, for example, I went on a trade mission to Taiwan. You know, when you start the conversation with, you know, are you guys in favor of trade? It's a difficult question. And for me, it's so important because, just as Zippy said, you've got to get that next generation interested in ag. And in order to do that, you have to have not only sustainability, but a reasonable expectation of sustainability, because it's hard to buy that farm or that ranch and be in and out in 5 years. I mean, it takes many, many years to pay those off. And I also think that when I think about ag, it's not, you know, it really puts our country in a difficult place if we as a country get to a point where we cannot feed ourselves. It really puts us in a difficult situation. So, Ray, I guess the question is, you know, long-term, short-term, how do you see trade, ag trade expanding from the United States into different parts of the world, and what do we need to be doing as states to make sure that happens?
It's a great question, Governor Mead, and thank you for it. I would say, let me start with the second part of the question. The states inevitably are wonderful partners with regard to the trade staff that you have in your state departments of commerce and your state departments of agriculture. As we know, in the United States, most of our buyers here are private parties. In the markets where we look around in the world and think we can make the most gains, a lot of those buyers are literally inextricably tied up in with the government. And so when our growers take trips overseas and they're able to bring along a governor or a commerce secretary or a secretary of ag or state commissioner of ag, that is a helpful thing. So I would say, first of all, continue doing those things, making those investments at the state level. Secondly, in terms of the bigger picture of what we want to do, we want to follow the money. You used the phrase sustainable. I mean, you want folks to come back to the farm, but to be able to do that, you've got to show a rate of sustainability, I would say a rate of return, that you're going to make money, and we know where those margins are today. I mean, I think Zippy and Rod would agree that particularly with regard to our largest commodities, the margin is in what can we sell overseas. We have more than enough to saturate our own market. And so when we start looking around the world, there's really, in my view, trend-wise, two things to watch. One of those is, where can we sell feed for states that are growing more protein for a growing middle class that's eating more eggs and meat? And then secondly, where can we actually sell the protein ourselves? And of course, where we really want to focus on that is in South and Eastern Asia, markets that we believe are ripe just given the economic situations in those countries where you literally have a growing middle class.
Thank you. Zippy, next question for you. You know, you're talking about the importance of NAFTA and how to move that forward in the negotiations. You know, we have heard anecdotally, and I believe it is true, just even the discussion of NAFTA can affect commodity prices. And I think that is important, how you discuss it, because I think it reflects about how important that is to our ag producers. And I ask you to comment on that in terms of what you hear from your members on getting to the end game that the administration's working on and you all care about.
Sure, NAFTA is so important. Our people are so wired up, and of course they're nervous, but we still, you know, have a lot of faith and this administration and Secretary Perdue, who is is a big voice in the room with the president talking about NAFTA. When you start talking about NAFTA and it makes the other countries nervous, we've seen Mexico buy a little corn other places, a little rice other places. We can't even get Canada to even talk to our administration about their dairy programs that they have. They have some 200% tariffs on dairy products that we have going into Canada. So fair trade is what we want to work for. So there are areas in NAFTA that need some work, and we would support that. But all in all, as a whole, that's a wonderful trade treaty for us, and we don't want to do any harm to it. We want to do what the president says he's going to do better for us. But every time we have discussions with either those countries or other countries about trade, and we talk about any particular barrier going up, whether it be a tariff on steel or aluminum or anything like that, I'll immediately get phone calls from my counterparts in other countries saying, you know where they're going to hit you. If you start talking about putting barriers up, they'll hit agriculture first. Perfect example is that when 80s was terrible time for agriculture. I remember I was a young farmer, and I'd go in at night, and 2 or 3 times a week you'd hear of a farmer committing suicide across the country because we was all upside down during that time. What ended that was we took the embargo off of Russia, and it started turning the tide, and we started moving products. So we're very sensitive to trade. We're always the one that gets hit first.
Thank you. Let me turn it over to Governor Bullock. Any question?
Sure, and again, thank all 3 of you for being here. Ray, you kind of listed out your 4 worries, and one of them was, where's the effect of kind of the long-term views regarding how we support our farmers or our producers. And I was hoping each of you would plow that field a little bit deeper, both what are we doing right, what do we need to be doing as states or as a nation as we go forward?
Let me start with, and certainly I'm going to give these gentlemen a second to think of a better answer than mine, but since I go first, I would say I think education continues to be key about putting 2 things together. One of those is we've just had a healthy conversation about how important, and we all agree how important trade is to the bottom line of agriculture. But if we look at some, and it's not a but, it's a and, if we look at our trading partners around the world and places where we may not be selling what we believe we could sell more efficiently than perhaps they could grow themselves, part of that is because they have subsidy systems or they have artificial barriers to the entry of our product into their country. And so when we evaluate our own farm programs, which no doubt are expensive, I mean, there's a conversation about money to be had with regard to funding the Farm Bill, to be sure. But when we look around the world, Europe, for instance, subsidizes their wine industry alone more than we subsidize all of agriculture in Title I of the Farm Bill. And so we are fighting on a world market with a hand tied behind our back if we are not also supporting our farmers through the programs in Title I and in crop insurance and even some of our trade promotion stuff that we do in the Farm Bill.
I would just add that, as budget constraints continue to get tighter and more difficult, the Farm Bill conversation's changed a lot over the years as well, and has gotten more difficult. And one of the things that I've seen folks starting to point out is we have to work harder to justify the dollars that are being spent. The conservation title, for example, which I'm certainly most familiar with, a lot of times we used to talk in terms of how many dollars went out the door or how many acres were enrolled in this or that or the other. Consumers want to understand, and I think the public wants to understand, what is the actual tangible benefit of the programs? And can we talk in terms of nutrient loss that's been prevented, soil erosion that's been prevented, wildlife benefit that's been built up? And I think we have to start, when it comes to the Farm Bill, because there's so much misunderstanding in the general public, we have to begin talking about the benefits in terms that the public will really grasp and understand. Otherwise, it's going to be harder and harder to defend these kinds of programs.
So I hit it from a little different point of view, and if you talk about bringing young people back to the farm, and that stays on, that's one of my worries, Ray, is how we keep young people involved. And in our states, I see more and more states moving away from funding ag education in high school. More and more states moving away from helping push our 4-H programs. You know, if we don't give children a taste of this great industry and a knowledge of where their food comes from outside of Walmart or Ingles or wherever you might shop, they'll never come back. And that's the first place we touch them is in high school through those programs. And even if they don't end up in agriculture, look what great leaders they've developed. So those two programs. The other thing, trade, which is so important. Everybody around the world wants to know where their food comes from. Everybody. And a lot of you, when you go on trade missions for your state, I know a lot of you take either your State Farm Bureau president or somebody in agriculture with you. I salute you for doing that. If you're not doing that, you need to take them. Those people around the world and in America want to meet the farmer that's growing their food. And it just it adds so much to the discussion if they can have that conversation with the person that has the knowledge of how they're growing their food.
Thank you, Zippy. Let me open it up to the other governors. Governor Walker.
You know, when I came into office, when oil dropped to $26 a barrel, which funded 90% of our revenue, one of the things that rose to the surface was agriculture. And when we became a state, we used to raise 50% of what we consumed. And now we raise 5% as a result of what has changed. So we're getting, agriculture is rising to the surface in a very significant way. One of the things we are concerned about is food security in Alaska. You know, one late ship or one storm, suddenly we have empty shelves. So we are focusing on Alaskan grown, trying to emphasize that. And we have a farm to school program that our schools are now buying local produce and trying to increase that. We have a competition we started with Safeway and Fred Meyer's and other retailers up to reward. We just had a celebration at the governor's house, a big dinner for the retailer that sold the most Alaskan grown. So we're trying to work that 5% up. It's a $2 billion industry in Alaska, and of which so we don't need to look for the market. We are the market. So my question to you, and Ray, I admire anybody that only has 4 things to worry about. I wish I only had 4 things to worry about.
That makes me feel better, Governor Walker.
Yeah, no, you ought to feel good if you only got 4 things to worry about. But my question to you is this: what percentage of the food consumed in our United States do we grow 100% of our food? Do we import food?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm going to answer it by trying to avoid espousing exact statistics, but break it up by sectors, break it up by subsectors of our plate, if you will. And obviously, in some places, these numbers are very beneficial, and in some places, they ought to make us nervous. So if you look at the seafood sector, we're bringing in a substantial amount of what we consume here in the United States. If you look at the fruit and vegetable sector, we're probably bringing in somewhere around half and half. That's actually ended up being a boon to many of our U.S. producers because it means they can offer a restaurant or a food service company a product year-round, which increases the actual demand for that product, therefore increasing the domestic demand for that product. And then you've got in places like our traditional protein, chicken, poultry, beef, and pork, we are obviously doing that more efficiently here than most folks around the world. And by the time you add the infrastructure and transportation cost, very, very little of that is coming in for elsewhere. So that's my sort of level set on what we're doing there. And I think each of those sectors requires different answers for how we strengthen our dependence on American grown and lessen our dependence on foreign grown.
Governor Hutchinson, thank you.
maybe now I'll be heard. Opening up the China market for our U.S. rice, but they still have to do the phytosanitary agreements or inspections. And can you comment on the status of that, knowing how just a small part of the China market, what it would mean to U.S. rice production and all of agriculture? I know they've opened up their beef, which is a great victory for us, but can you comment on where we are in terms of finishing the deal and when we can expect rice to go to China?
Let me start the answer, Governor Hutchinson, to that question by saying that we've got a room full of governors, a room full of media, and a guy from the White House, and I'm probably the only one that doesn't want to make news with my answer here. What you're talking about in the context for everybody in the room was really a part of a package of things that the United States had negotiated for with China at the beginning of this administration. There was this dialogue going back and forth with China, which is not unique. A number of administrations over the past 20 or 25 years began with an earnest conversation with China about how do we open certain doors to selling more of our products within your country. Those conversations have consistently gone splendidly at the beginning, and then over time you realize the list of 8 or 10 things that you have, you're not able to check all of those boxes. And so I would just say sincerely and very transparently, the guarantees we have from the Chinese are that they're going to come and do their inspections. They're going to say that we do pass their sanitary and phytosanitary test. We don't have any nervousness about that. We'll be transparent about that. But what you are seeing with regard to the delay in that is precisely, I believe, the thing that frustrates the president about trade. We want to set a set of rules, set a level playing field, and then let's compete and be transparent about the reasons why we are or are not allowing a product to come in or out of our countries. And so one of the non-tariff barriers to trade is this idea of, oh, we need to come inspect how you're raising things, we need to check your process, or we're going to manufacture a process for us that's very different than all of the rest of the industrialized world applies to this particular product or this particular line of trade. And so while I'm optimistic we will work those things out, we certainly want to do that. I certainly am not on the precipice of any major announcement with regard to that. So I don't want to dash hopes. We're certainly optimistic and hopeful, but at the same time, you guys are only in town till Tuesday, and I doubt we'll announce it before then. But if we do, we'll call you and make sure you're there.
Hey, Governor Cooper, please. Thank you.
Now it's working right. We were trying to keep his microphone off, not yours, Governor Hutchinson.
Spoken like a true North Carolinian, as you are.
Thank you, Governor Cooper.
We're glad to have you there. We've seen the significant benefits to farmers with rural broadband. We've just seen some small farmers just turn things around when they get access to high-speed internet. Have there been discussions with transportation regarding the upcoming infrastructure bill and whether there is some potential for proposals to be made regarding broadband? I know we've got a lot of competition for the infrastructure money, and there's a long way for it to go. But where do you see broadband either in that infrastructure bill or in other areas for states?
Yeah, great question. I'd really point sort of to 3 things, and the first of those is exactly as your question posited, the infrastructure package that the president has proposed. For the dollar amount that's in that package, the $200 billion to $250 billion that we hope to leverage up to over $1 trillion, 25% of the funds that the president has in that package are dedicated solely to rural America, and they will be handed out, literally handed, relatively few strings attached to the governors of each state. Now that's the way the president proposed it. We'll see what happens if the bill gets legs, gets through Congress, and comes out on the other side. But part of the reason we wanted to do it that way was we truly believe in this idea of laboratories of democracy. We truly believe that you all at the state level are held very accountable and that you have a better idea of what sort of rural investments need to be made in your state. To that end, some states have made tremendous progress through the years on expanding rural broadband. And so if we were to hand you those dollars, maybe that's not where you would choose to spend them in your state. But first and foremost, in the infrastructure package that the president has proposed, 25% set aside for rural, and that money is literally held out and handed to the governors in each of those states. Obviously, we would be thrilled if a lot of that money went to broadband. Secondly, you saw the executive actions the President took out at the Farm Bureau meeting that Zippy referred to. We want to talk about how we leverage federal assets, particularly in your western states where the federal government is a large percentage landowner. Do we have towers? Do we have infrastructure? Do we have property that can be leveraged by either the government or the private sector to extend broadband out there? And then thirdly, how do we invest what we already are spending throughout the federal government and leveraging at the state level? How do we spend it better? So a good example for this that's really easy for even an Eastern North Carolina guy like me to understand is we have money in some budgets for broadband for health care. Well, the Congress has recognized and previous administrations have recognized that hospitals and medical care really rely on this kind of technology and the ability to communicate over broadband. So there are grant programs for extending health programs into rural America on broadband. Similarly, there are grant programs that relate to education and to other sectors. We want to look at how that money is being spent and make sure it's not siloed. How can we put those funds together and then do two things at one time or get more bang for the buck out of that money? It sounds a little bit cliche, but genuinely that effort is going on. And then, of course, FCC is trying, I believe, and we're trying to do on the permitting side too, make that process as efficient and as safe, economically and ecologically successful still, but to minimize the pain points of installing broadband, particularly in rural America. A good example of one of the things we're taking a look at is part of the bond that you have to post pursuant to federal law with regard to putting in fiber is a bond that was designed to cover the risk of a pipeline leaking. So if a fiber optic cable leaks, it doesn't really go very far. A pipeline, it presents a different situation. So maybe we still need a bond, maybe we still need something to ensure environmental compliance, but does it need to be different for fiber than it is for other kinds of infrastructure or other kinds of energy or utilities that we might have out there? So all of those things, it's all of the above approach, but I cannot overemphasize that you all, from our perspective, are the people that should have the pen and should have the steering wheel on how we're going to deploy these dollars out in rural America, because different parts of rural across America need different solutions, and we think you're the best ones to be able to figure that out.
We'd say amen to that, George.
You can say amen.
Let me, we're out of time. I just want to thank the panel and again the opportunity, those of us sitting here and many who are governors who cannot be here right now want to keep ag at the forefront of our discussions here at NGA. We recognize what it means to our economy, the opportunity for trade, open space, recreation. You all have been great, providing excellent information to us. So we hope we will continue to have this discussion at NGA, and we hope you will come back and provide us even more education. So thank you very much, and we applaud you for your service. Thank you. Chairman Sandoval, what's next?
I think we're adjourned for now.
Okay. We're adjourned. That was great, Pat.